I'm sorry to interrupt your conversations, which seem to be going so well, and it seems a little bit strange for me to be saying welcome because I'm from far away, but I feel very at home here as well. I want to start with a vote of thanks from Ubuntu, which is the organization in South Africa which contributed to bringing the exhibition here. Ernest Mangoba, the South African artist whose aesthetic and philosophy inspired the formation of the Art in Ubuntu Trust, speaks of artists being in contact across space and time in their awareness that the spiritual and the material dimensions of our world need to be reconciled. Through an insightful engagement with Bajan culture, Abdulkader Ahmed Said, commonly known here as Mr. Said, facilitated contact between Peter Clarke and George Lamming across the Atlantic Ocean last year. Although they didn't know it, they had been in indirect contact since the 1950s through Peter Clarke's reading of and strong identification with George Lamming's work. Professor Gladstone Yearwood, the director of the Errol Barrow Centre for Creative Imagination, responded with faith and determination to the possibilities of this contact, and he is primarily responsible for the exhibition's manifestation. We thank him profoundly and acknowledge his courage and creative vision, which made contact between our two countries possible. It is clear that we can, although we might still have to fly via the first world to reach each other, build initiatives where sharing knowledge and mutual understanding enrich our lives. We have a huge historical legacy of division to overcome, but initiatives like this give concrete expression to Art Ubuntu's guiding concept, the proverb, Umuntu ngamuntu ngabanye abantu. A person is a person by and because of other people. This proverb is well known in different forms throughout Africa and could be regarded as the basis of African humanism based on collective spirituality. We are more than privileged to have this collaboration with the Errol Barrow Centre for the Creative Imagination, which concretizes links between our two similar societies. At the Errol Barrow Centre and in Barbados in general, we have been privileged to work with three professionals with great soul: Francis Hines Griffith, Nerisse Rudder, who curated the exhibition, and Shaka Rodney. Again, a positive connection across the Atlantic Ocean manifests in Shaka's life story. His father, Walter, who worked in East Africa, is a legendary and inspiring figure for us. Another thanks to Abdulkader Ahmed Said for photos and invitation design, and to Rodney Iffel for his assistance with the photo session, as well as his passionate appreciation of the art. He gave us a foretaste of how Bajans might respond to it, which was very encouraging. Paula Maskell and her team for exhibiting professionalism, incredible professionalism and grace under pressure. Brian Elcock must be mentioned especially for his late hours completing the catalogue, and Lorraine Lashley for typing the labels. There's some people across the Atlantic Ocean whose faces you won't see, but I'd like to mention them. Josephine Frater, one of the Art in Ubuntu trustees who participated in the selection of the works in Cape Town over a number of hot Cape Town summer Sundays, always gives generously of herself to Art in Ubuntu projects. And Khadija Badat is keeping the home fires burning in our office in Cape Town. Together they are keeping contact with Peter Clarke as things proceed here. When the possibility of the exhibition emerged, he said, "I am terribly excited," and he would love to be with us, and he's with us in spirit tonight. So last but not least, we thank the artist Peter Clarke for his thoughtfulness, humility, and genius, and for the privilege of being able to show work spanning 6 decades of his life, which powerfully link our two societies. And I now have a statement to read from Peter Clarke, and I'm really moved and privileged to be his emissary here in Barbados. You'll be given a copy of this, and it's in his own handwriting, which you might find difficult to read, but I think it's beautiful. I love artists' handwritings. Being born 2nd of June 1929, the earliest period of my childhood coincided precisely with the earliest years of the worldwide Great Depression. But out of the incredible poverty of a childhood in the ghetto, I do have the richness of some precious memories, which I owe to the fact that I was part of a stable, close, and devoted family. Simon's Town, depicted behind me, where I was born and where we lived, was a naval town, the South Atlantic base of the British Royal Navy. It had, and still has, a character all of its own. Visitors often comment on its Englishness, and this I find interesting. But as a child living there, what created a strong impression on me was the fact that throughout its history, it has seen the movement of many people, all kinds, indigenous locals as well as outsiders, foreigners arriving from and departing to other areas of the world, north, south, east and west. Taking part last year in the Genographic project in sub-Saharan Africa, like all participants, local and former local residents of Simonstown, I had to provide the team with a saliva sample for research purposes. In due course, receiving my results, I was astonished to find that in my ancestry are predecessors whose origins lie not only in the continent of Africa, but also in Siberia, the Americas, East and Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Europe and India. How amazing this complexity, when just like other human beings, I look the uncomplicated way I do. Simonstown being a naval town, every day the sea washed into my consciousness. Local fishermen and their boats and sailors and their ships emphasized the fact of the invisible courses of voyages are undertaken this way and that way, on the South Atlantic and other oceans of the world. In childhood, I looked forward to the family outings to relatives living in various parts of the Western Cape. One of my father's elderly aunts was Auntie Johanna, whose particular quirk was wearing a man's hat to shield her head from the heat of summer. The other unusual thing about Auntie Johanna was her husband, Uncle Charles. In actual fact, Henry Charles spoke with a quote-unquote funny accent, even though he looked like one of us. I wondered about him. Many years later, when I asked about Uncle Charles, my dad told me, Uncle Charles came from Barbados. Today, when I am an elderly person, it pains me that my history is so fragmented. I would love to have known Uncle Charles's story, how he came to be where he became destined to be related to me. I will never know, sadly. Now all that I possess of that old uncle is the faded memory of his accent, with its origins on an island unknown to me, except by its position on the map. Thousands of miles lay between the reality of that island and my own existence. On Tuesday, 7th of December, 1954, I was 25 years old at the time. I bought an American paperback book titled New World Writing, 4th Mentor Selection. Today, in 2009, the volume, alas, after all these years, with pages loose and held together, discolored with tape and time and affection, still holds its place in my library. I have read this book over and over and over because it contains a wealth of fiction, non-fiction, poetry, and artwork by a collection of creative men and women of the wide world. Included in this amazing anthology is a work, an excerpt from a novel, In the Castle of My Skin, by a young Barbadian writer named George Lamming. It was while reading the Lamming work that I found myself thinking, but all of this is so familiar, the characters, their responses to each other's presence, the setting, the colors projected into one's consciousness, all of it as if out of my own life. I wondered about George Lamming's Barbados, the island from which my father's uncle, Henry Charles, came at some unknown date in my family's historical background. I wonder if when Uncle Charles arrived in South Africa, he seemed strangely familiar to people living here. I wonder when viewers become acquainted with me by way of my exhibition, if they might see me as strangely familiar too. It will please me greatly if they do. I would like visitors to this exhibition to regard the collection as a sample of a much larger output of a fairly long art career. In this way, I hope you of the African diaspora will enjoy the experience of becoming acquainted with this distant member of your family. Thank you. I think the exhibition is now.